sons and daughters.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Aurora Smedley podcast, where I speak with you about what the world needs to hear. And in today's episode, I'm going to be discussing spiritual awakenings and what a spiritual awakening process looks like and how to deal with a spiritual awakening if you experience one. So this is something that I think is really under-discussed in our society, is that so many people have these spiritual experiences, but they do not know how to A, deal with them, B, they don't know that they're having a spiritual experience in the first place, so it's very disorienting, and C, how to live their life after the spiritual experience. And so in this podcast, I'm going to delineate basically what happens during a spiritual experience, what happens during a spiritual awakening, and how to move through that afterwards so that you can live your life in alignment with this new reality that you have encountered. So let's start with what is a spiritual awakening. And I feel that the essence of a spiritual awakening is understanding that, or having a potent experience or vision that connects you with all of reality. So in the moment, in the realization of a spiritual awakening, you connect to the reality that all of the universe, all of everything, all of reality is one, that we are all one beingness, that we are one entity, that we are one universe, that despite the fact that we all have individual motives, that we have individual desires, preferences, personalities, despite the fact that we all have individuality, we are all part of one greater intelligence, one greater consciousness, which is the universe at large. Some might call this God, some might call this source, some might call this the creator, but I refer to this as the universe. So when you have a spiritual awakening, you will essentially have an experience where you connect to this reality on a experiential and physical level, where you fundamentally understand that all of the universe is connected. And this is easy to understand in a psychological way, but when you have a spiritual awakening, it happens in an experiential way. When you have a spiritual awakening, your felt body sense is that all of reality is connected. And this sounds fantastic, and it is fantastic. Usually when people have a spiritual awakening, sometimes it can be painful, but many times it can be a very joyous, enlightening, expanding kind of experience for many. However, the actual challenge of the spiritual experience often happens not during the spiritual experience, but actually after. After the spiritual experience has happened, then we have the challenges, then we have the difficulty, then we have the challenge of how do we integrate this new experience, this new understanding of reality into our life. So I'm also going to touch here on the fact that sometimes a spiritual awakening can be quite painful. And this is because we are holding on to our previous understanding of reality. Speaking for myself, I was very materialist, rationalist up until the age of about 23. It was around this time that I had my first spiritual awakening process, and this happened as a result of psychedelics. My first foray into becoming connected to all of reality happened as a result of me taking LSD under the supervision of my friend. So as I was on LSD, then I was able to connect with this reality of all of existence being in connection. previous to that as well, I had met people that said, oh, you need to do LSD because you're going to feel the connection of the whole universe and stuff. And obviously, I thought it was absolutely baloney. At the time, I could never have imagined ever doing any kind of drug. I was very square. I was very proper. I did not want to do any kinds of drugs. I said no to drugs. I didn't want to do weed. I didn't want to do alcohol. I was very clean for the greater part of my life. And I was also very materialist rationalist. But this shifted for me after I started experiencing severe depression. Because once I started experiencing severe depression from 2015 through 2020, roughly, during that time period, my emotional world was so intense that I felt that I had to find something, be it whatever, in order to resolve the fact that my internal reality was so painful. So I was essentially open to doing anything at all that would shift my internal reality from being one of wanting to self-destruct to being one of happiness and fulfillment. So at this point, I was basically open to anything, and I had several conversations with different people who all shared with me how psychedelics were critical for their own happiness and well-being, and especially coming out of psychiatric conditions. And while I'm not promoting this for everybody, right? And, obviously, hashtag disclaimer, please do your own research. And I did my research and I chose to do psychedelics. And after I did psychedelics, then I found that, oh my gosh, I had this experience of being connected to all of reality. And this was the beginning of a complete shift and change in my life, because previous to that, like I said, I was materialist and rationalist. And at this point, I went back into my life and I really started to struggle, because after I had this experience, I didn't know anybody else who had had these similar experiences. So I felt very alone. I was out in the world interacting with people, and I wanted to share and process this spiritual awakening experience that I had had, but I didn't have anybody to process this experience with, to communicate this to in a way that they would actually understand, that they would not be judging me for it, not be reacting to it, that they would know exactly what I was speaking towards. And so this actually became a very difficult and challenging aspect of life after my spiritual awakening process. And in truth, it was not just one spiritual awakening. I had a series of multiple spiritual experiences over the course of about 2 years that all shifted my worldview drastically from the materialist rationalist worldview. And this includes both on psychedelics and off of psychedelics. I had multiple experiences that led me to realize that the materialist rationalist way of looking at the world is not the only reality, that there is a reality that extends beyond that adds another dimensional textural layer to reality, which is beyond simply this physical reality. And so this led me to having a lot of challenge in figuring out how to deal with my life now that I had this new realization about how reality worked. Because once you have a spiritual awakening, it changes your value system. And when it changes your value system, it changes the way that you orient in the world, what decisions you're making, what you feel are the right decisions for you in your life, what you feel is appropriate for your actions and behaviors as you move forward. So because of this, it can actually be very challenging. It can really make it difficult for you to orient your life, since essentially your center of gravity has just shifted. So to generalize on this a bit, I'm going to point to the fact that a spiritual awakening process can be quite challenging and painful for many people, even though the actual experience of the spiritual awakening itself is usually expansive and beautiful beyond comprehension. The return to a physical reality where most people are not in tune with that actually creates a lot of challenge, because essentially once you've had a spiritual experience, for the most part, all the people around you are going to be denying that experience. And so essentially, the whole world around you is going to deny this reality that you have experienced. So the vast majority of everyone that you interact with are not tuned in to this relationship to all that is. And so you have to contend with a world that is not tuned in to the same reality that you are. It almost feels like you're being gaslit all the time because your conception of reality is being denied by every single person around you for the most part. And so while there may be some individuals that do relate, the majority of society, like I said, is not like this. And so you kind of need to seek it out. You kind of need to open yourself up to finding the community, the people that are on the same wavelength, so that you feel that you have company through this expansion of your consciousness and your conscious awareness. So I know that some people have the fortunate situation where they have people around them that understand, that can validate, that can help them think about and integrate their experience now into their life, into their actions, into how they are moving through the world. However, many people who have a spiritual experience basically have to keep this experience on lock in perpetuity because other people around them are not talking about it, are not communicating about it, have not had similar experiences themselves. And so because of this, it can feel very lonely as you are going through this process. So now I'm going to speak to this idea of integration after you have a spiritual awakening, because what is really challenging about a spiritual awakening process is that after you have a spiritual awakening, you need to decide how you're going to live your life after that, how your life is going to look after that, what your friendships are going to look like, what your relationships are going to look like, what is true to you now that you have this new understanding of reality. And this shift in your reality conception can be so fundamental that you are reassessing all of your friendships, all of your relationships, where you live, what you're doing, your job, your work. And so sometimes people can get really discouraged or challenged by this integration process. But what I'm going to point to is that the challenge of this integration process is really having the physical reality around you shift to your new internal reality. It is shifting the external, shifting what you are doing in your life, what your relationships look like, shifting all of this to match what is new inside of you, this new reality, this new perception of reality. How to take actions, how to build your life, perhaps build your business and relationships, etc., from this new understanding of reality. Something that I found to be very beneficial and supportive for me as I went through my own awakening process was understanding that many people will not understand what you're going through. Many people will not comprehend it. And that's okay. I think many of us that go through a spiritual awakening process, we want to be heard. We want to be validated. We want other people to see us. We want other people to get it. But sometimes a big part of the spiritual awakening process is letting go of this need to be validated, letting go of this need to be understood, letting go of this need to have other people see you or get you, etc. Because honestly, nobody is going to get you. And I know that this sounds maybe kind of negative, maybe kind of discouraging, but the reality is that we don't even understand ourselves most of the time. That the only thing that can really understand you is the universe, is the creator, is all of existence. This is the only thing that can truly understand you, because everyone else is looking at you through their own lens, through their perception of what they think that you are, of what they think that you are based off of their previous experiences and biases. Because everybody has their own biases, everybody has their own lens. We're all looking at reality through our own lens, through our own experiences, through our own perceptions. And so every other person's perception of you is a distortion on reality, is a distortion of what you are. And your own self-perception is also a distortion on what you are, because you are beyond that. You are an entity that is beyond description, that is beyond this physical body. In converse, I found that it was very helpful for me to also find these spiritual communities, to integrate with these spiritual communities in order to hear other people's perspectives, hear how other people were adapting and moving through this process in order to live their lives. Interestingly, in this process, I found that even people that are spiritual might have a different lived experience than you, might have different perceptions of a spiritual awakening process than you do. So the point then, the value then, is not in being right, is not in having the right perspective, is not knowing God whereas somebody else doesn't know God. It's about your own relationship to all that is. It's about your relationship to yourself, to your highest self, and to the Creator. So another aspect of this that I did find challenging as well is that once I had my spiritual awakening, I did also find that it was more difficult for me to find work that felt aligned, because so much of the work out there is often disconnected from this relationship to the creative forces of the universe. A lot of jobs, etc., are very mechanistic, they're very authoritarian, and all of this was, at this point, completely opposed to my worldview, completely opposed to my value system. I don't believe in controlling people. I believe in leading people. And so when I was in work situations where I was being controlled, where management was using these carrot stick methods with me, trying to scare me into certain behaviors, then I really felt that my relationship with the work was starting to become fragmented. Similarly, with my friendships, I found that I had a challenge in my friends didn't understand what I was going through. And so what I've found now is that I have to do work. I have to be in situations that are resonant with my energy, that I need to relate to people that I resonate with, that I vibe with. I can't just look at a set of checklists as far as what my friend group looks like. Instead, I pay attention to resonance, whether I feel aligned with certain people, places, workplaces in my life. So after my spiritual awakening, I had to place a lot more attention onto whether relationships were resonant for me, whether relationships were supportive of me, whether workplaces, whether places that I lived were resonant with me. This began to refine my decision-making process as I began to shift my life more towards something that was aligned with me and my new worldview. And for me, this also took the shape of moving my life towards my creative career, towards music, and away from academia, which was what I originally was aimed towards. It has been a path where I felt a lot of vulnerability. But on the other hand, it has caused me to feel so much more aligned and fulfilled in my life path, so much more confident of my path and my growth than I could have imagined before. So what I'm saying here is that if you are going through a spiritual awakening, if you've gone through a spiritual awakening, there's a big readjustment period that happens afterwards where you need to shift all of these life structures, all of these personal relationships, even intimate relationships, in order to fit this new worldview, this new resonant frequency that you have. And this process can take some time because things happen instantaneously on an energetic level. And then on the physical level, it could take some time to manifest. There is often an adjustment process after you have a spiritual awakening. And so you need to allow this adjustment process to take whatever time frame that it's going to take. So with that, I appreciate you spending this time with me. I know that this will be supportive for you if you are having a spiritual awakening, experiencing a spiritual awakening, if you know somebody that has recently had a spiritual awakening. And I look forward to your thoughts on this podcast, your comments, and I look forward to seeing you in the next podcast.